This is Time and Other Thieves, reflections and conversations on the nature of existence. I'm Sarah B., and in this episode I'm going to share a recent Zoom lecture I gave back in December of 2025 called A Stoic's Guide to Group, in which I explore connections between the book Meditations by Roman Stoic philosopher and Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and certain theories that are behind the running of modern analytic interpersonal process groups. So just like in the last episode of Time and Other Thieves, when I also shared a Zoom lecture that I gave previously, there are slides that originally went with my words. Of course, you won't be able to see those slides on this podcast, but they're not really necessary. I'm mostly just reading quotes from meditations. So I read those out loud and you don't necessarily need to see them. So it should be pretty easy to follow. And I will check back in with you once the lecture ends and add a few concluding comments that I didn't have time to work into the lecture itself. Thanks so much for listening. I'm going to be talking about, obviously, Marcus Aurelius's ideas, and then also Louis Ormont is a huge influence in the type of groups that I like to run and the type of groups I like to be in. Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic emperor and philosopher living in the 2nd century from 121 to 180 of the current era. And then Louis Ormont lived from 1918 to 2008, and he founded the Center for Group Studies, which is a wonderful place to get training in process groups. It's in New York City, but they do these 3 times a year intensive weekend trainings that I love doing. And you can do all 9 of them and get certified, and you can do reading blocks and get supervision and learn all about this modern analytic approach to running groups. That's the specific background there. And both of these men lived a very long time for, their era. Marcus was 59 when he died, which is ancient in those days, especially given the endless multiple plagues that were happening all throughout his life. And Louis Ormont was 90 when he died. I think it's pretty common for group leaders to live a long time. There was a recent study about, the biggest predictor of longevity is your interpersonal life, your relational life, and how rich that is. So I think Louis Ormont would agree with this statement of Marcus's, that in a sense, people are our proper occupation, and our job is to do them good and put up with them. Any quotes that you see will be from Marcus unless I say otherwise. So my favorite translation of Meditations is, well, it's the only one I've read, but I've glanced at others and I can tell that I just really prefer this language of the Gregory Hayes translation, Hays, that came out in 2002. And there's a really long, really good introduction to that translation where he lays out a lot of the Stoic principles and the history of Marcus's life. And I do think it's appropriate to call him Marcus. I think that is the way it's said, as opposed to calling him Aurelius, just because names were different back then. So I will be calling him Marcus. And among the handful of the themes that he repeatedly addresses in Meditations, it is a very repetitive book. He's basically talking to himself and just reminding himself of things over and over again in different ways. And a significant one of those is the problem posed by other people. And obviously, group work is all about other people. In fact, the first sentence of book 2 of Meditations, which I consider the real beginning of the book, because the first book is more of like his life, like thanking the people in his life. And then we get into book 2, and that's where it's like him talking more to himself and exploring these ideas. And the first sentence in that book is, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. And then the essential question to which these kinds of statements always lead is, what are you going to do? So in the introduction to Meditations, Gregory Hayes, he talks about the basic tenets of Stoicism. And I think the ones that most clearly apply to group are these three disciplines of perception, action, and will. Regarding perception, Marcus strove to see things accurately and not distort them with value judgments and projections and assumptions. And in group, we try to do this. We look at our perceptions of people and study how accurate those are by voicing them. Is this really, a projection based on someone from my past or in my family, that sort of thing. So we're really looking at how we see. And then the discipline of action, Hayes says, relates to our relationship with other people and invites us to do what only we can do. And for the Stoic, we're all participants in what they call the logos, which is as much a process as a substance. I think it can be defined in many ways, but the logos is basically the nature of things, the order of things, the inherent intelligence in things that is coursing through us as well all the time. And then the discipline of will is what Matt was touching on. It's basically this acceptance, or what Epictetus called the art of acquiescence, which first seems contradictory to action and maybe not something that would be very helpful in a process group, but it actually frees up more energy for more effective action when we're not trying to change things that we can't change. And I find this is especially helpful for group leaders because we're regularly having to accept more difficult group members' personality traits and resistance patterns. And we try to join them, right? Which is the opposite of resisting, and is really a very loving kind of acceptance or will practice. And certainly not all the ideas in meditations apply to group by a long stretch, but I was, because I'm so obsessed with group, pretty much everything I read or encounter, I'm looking at through this lens. So I see things that others might not see, and I saw quite a bit that I thought applied and that I thought was exciting. So perception. Marcus says, throw out your misperceptions and you'll be fine. What is this thing that now forces itself on my notice? So one of the main invitations I think of group, other than putting thoughts and feelings into words, first you have to be noticing what you're thinking and feeling. And in a group, the things that force themselves on your notice are the other group members. So there's lots to notice, both externally and internally. And when we see people that we don't know, our projections immediately just start running amok. And this is amplified when there's a group of people. We see people that we don't know and we just instantly put them into categories and judge them based on, who they remind us of, what they look like, how they talk, how they dress, etc. So we're just noticing all of that and then taking risks and putting those projections into words. And we can do it with people's emotions and behaviors when we do know them well, say in like a long-term group, and they behave in a way we haven't seen before, and this is new, maybe someone has an angry outburst. Instead of recoiling in disgust or fear, we can just maybe ask, why is this happening? Or as Marcus says, what is it made up of and how long was it designed to last? Anger is usually a cover for something more tender and enduring that is meant to last. And anger is this short-lived protective reaction. And we can look at that as something precious and ephemeral to try and slow down and sit with so that we can understand it better. So those three questions, what is this? What is it made up of? How long was it designed to last? Can be, I think, really great guides for group members and leaders alike. And then asking why, such a simple question. Chris, who just joined, he and I are co-leaders of a group, and we recently realized that a why question would be really helpful with this one particular dynamic in our groups. Why is this happening? This one thing keeps happening, why? Or when someone gets angry, why are they doing that? That's what Marcus said. Learn to ask of all actions. Why are they doing that? And he said, start with your own, of course. I once had a group member who got really angry and started yelling at another group member. And in retrospect, I wish I had just asked, why is Eva speaking to William in this way? What's happening for her right now? And then they could maybe put into words for her what she couldn't. So we're exploring the feelings instead of acting on them. And acting on them is often, ironically, synonymous with avoiding them. So to refrain from action, which I guess is maybe not the most stoic thing, but instead of action being physical, it's verbal when we're in the group. So he says, when feelings make their way into your thoughts through the sympathetic link between mind and body, don't try to resist the sensation. The sensation is natural, but don't let the mind start in with judgments, calling it good or bad. So again, this is looking at how we perceive things and how we label things. Marcus would say that everything that happens is actually supposed to be happening. And we perceive harm that isn't necessarily there by simply labeling it as harm. So this gets into the difference between thoughts and feelings. I would say that it's their inherently somatic quality that differentiates thoughts from feelings. And this is what we get to study in group. We always or often ask group members what's happening on a sensation level. As Marcus knew all too well, many of us resist our somatic experience the moment it starts happening, and we don't even know we're resisting it. So when I ask group members what they're noticing in their bodies, I'm simply making them more aware of what's happening below their necks. And they don't even have to know what they're feeling. They might actually be numb or just not able to access the sensation, but at least now they're aware of that, of, the lack of knowledge. And by talking about it, they're not resisting their experience as much because they have to sit with it in order to describe it. So in naming it, we don't resist it. And Marcus said, for a human being to feel stress is normal if he's living a normal human life. And if it's normal, how can it be bad? So when we're using our hands as hands and our feet as feet, they're going to get sore. And similarly, when we're, I would say, using our soul as soul or ourself as self, we're going to feel things, guilt, shame, fear, jealousy, hatred, deep loving compassion. That can be uncomfortable sometimes. And when we practice what Marcus called superhuman truthfulness and take relational risks, there's going to be this soreness involved. But we can talk about all that as it's happening as well and not be so inclined to label it as bad. And when he says, don't let the mind start in with judgments, that's kind of where I disagree. Like, no, let the mind do what the mind's going to do. Like, you can't make it not do that. You can't force it to behave, but you can study it, let it do its thing, talk about it in the group, and, with people's input, just become more aware of how it functions and what it's doing, what it might be preventing. You have to know an awful lot before you can judge other people's actions with real understanding. This, I think, touches on how group is really a long game. It takes a lot of time and slowing down and sitting with and naming things and all that good stuff to really know a person and understand where they're coming from and to watch our judgments again. Marcus said that no one ever came to grief by ignoring what goes on in other people's souls, but he far more often exhorted himself to enter others' minds and let them enter yours, to get inside their minds, to look at what their minds are really like. And none of this is happening on some like magical clairvoyant level. It's all in group, especially through people talking and people listening. You know, Marcus said, practice really hearing what people say. And in group, we're really listening for the emotional communication, for the feelings that are being communicated. Someone can be talking, and the group leader could simply ask, what are people hearing Betsy say right now? And she could get multiple different responses, and everyone in the group comes to a deeper understanding through that process, through looking at what's really happening on this emotional, deeper level underneath the words. And Marcus also says, once you see people clearly, you'll find you don't need to strain to impress them. So he's also doing this as a way to get past any like intimidation or jealousy or like putting people on a pedestal. Is like, they're all just people. There's nothing to be scared of there. So this other element, very big Stoic concept, is the idea of things being interconnected. So Marcus says to keep reminding yourself of this, the way things are interconnected, of their relatedness. All things are implicated in one another and in sympathy with each other. This event is the consequence of some other one. Things push and pull on each other and are one. And I think this is lovely to apply to, you know, interpersonal connection and how we're related as people. But this idea of all things being implicated in one another is very interesting in group when it comes to the concept of when people talk about stuff outside a group and they're not really in the present moment with each other. You can ask yourself as a group leader, how is what they're saying right now, or how is what they're talking about a description of what's happening right now in this room? This is a really fun thing to play with as a group leader. It's something that the leader of my and Vanessa's consultation group said recently, and it's been such a profound tool for me when people are seeming to avoid the here and now and talking about stuff outside of the room. It's just really fun and creative to think about how it's applying to the relationships in the room. So the content can be studied as a contingent thing, and it can go the other way too. Like if something's coming up and is really present for someone, you can wonder how it relates to the past. Does this feel old, you might ask? And then you can explore how a person's background is impacting how they're experiencing the present moment. And there's also this notion that if one person is feeling something in a group, at least two others are too. So there's that interconnectedness and relatedness, and that can give me as a leader maybe the courage to say something that the group isn't saying, because I can trust that if I'm feeling it, at least two other people are as well, and they're just not ready to say it. So I can either say it or I can help them, you know, I can intervene in a way that helps them say it. And I think this interconnectedness and relatedness will only get stronger as the group matures. Marcus said, intelligence is uniquely drawn toward what is akin to it and joins with it inseparably in shared awareness. And another way of saying that was an advanced level of development can produce a sympathy even in things that are quite distinct. So if we're doing this thing together for a long time, there's going to be this building of sympathy, even in very different personalities. And it even makes me think of these concepts from neurobiology. Hebb's axiom that neurons that fire together wire together, and then the notion of mirror neurons. When we see others doing it, a part of us in our brains is doing it too. When a group is at its best, I think, they're experiencing something they've never experienced before all together. So these neurons are firing and wiring together in all these different brains and creating these right brain to right brain connections, really cool ways. It's fun to think of. Right, we'll get into the action portion of the program. Don't gussy up your thoughts. No surplus words or unnecessary actions. So I have quite a few group members who will want to edit their thoughts before they speak. And, that often keeps them from speaking at all because that takes time to do and things are happening quickly. As much as I'm trying to slow them down, they still can happen very quickly in groups. And if you want to be speaking in perfectly constructed sentences and voicing your emotions exactly as they feel, it can be pretty deadening and can actually sometimes, in some cases, hijack a group. Some people are more comfortable just speaking off the cuff and kind of figuring out what they're trying to say as they're saying it. And I think that's great, and that others would benefit from practicing that more. I love the Jack Kerouac notion of first thought, best thought in group. And then you can just edit from there, refine as you go. Even Kerouac revised his writing quite a bit. So you can hopefully aim to speak in what I would call a heartfelt rough draft. And then the group can help you refine it, figure out what you really are wanting to say. So the language can be very simple and straightforward, and we can focus on like that center core of the feelings wheel, if you've seen it. Mad, sad, glad, scared is a really good place to start, a really great way to practice not gussying up your thoughts. You can also think in terms of yuck or yum. I like this, I don't like this. Let's start there, and we can flesh it out together. But like Marcus, a lot of people want to whittle their experience down to the essentials and ask themselves, as he did, ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary? He said that most of what we say or do is not essential, which I think is something of an overstatement, but as far as like all the small talk we do, and of course social media, we can stand to have less of that. He says if we eliminate those non-essentials, we'll have more time and more tranquility. But certainly in group, the goal is not to be more tranquil. That could maybe be eventually a happy outcome, but the goal is to practice speaking. So anything that gets in the way of that is not helpful. And then, of course, the gauge for what is necessary is so different in group than it is from the outside world, or what Martin Buber called the you world. That's where we're like wanting to be helpful or we're wanting to get help. But in group, we're just trying to offer our authentic selves and be honest. And that is what's necessary. We just want to say something because it's true for us in the moment. That's the essential thing. So much different than real life. He says, if an action or utterance is appropriate, then it's appropriate for you. Don't be put off by other people's comments and criticism. If it's right to say or do it, then it's the right thing for you to do or say. So here, appropriate to me seems synonymous to necessary, again, which seems synonymous to true. And this also reminds me of the modern analytic concept of objective countertransference. So certain actions or stimuli deserve certain responses. And objective countertransference basically means that one person's behavior is going to elicit the same response either internally, externally, or both from most people. So if someone in a group says something and you can tell that everyone's having the same reaction, this certainly happened one time when one of my group members said that he disdained certain aspects of another group member's personality. I mean, I could just tell that everyone was, everyone made a face, but no one said anything because, they're operating under this assumption that it's not appropriate for them to say. But Marcus would say, if it's appropriate to say, it's appropriate for you to say. And then this idea of going against the herd is really important and a great thing to practice in groups for members and leaders alike. And a really important aspect of any spiritual or philosophical life as well. Louis Ormont in the group therapy experience said that, sometimes as leaders, we have to, quote, step in hard and be willing to stand apart from the crowd and rebel against a certain aspect of group culture that can be really deadening and even threatening to the life of the group itself. So he says, in not going along as one of the crowd, we benefit both the particular member that maybe we're like standing up for or standing up to, and we benefit the group as a whole. And that benefit comes in the form of this real life example of healthy interpersonal risk taking. The leader's basically saying, I'm secure enough in myself to set my own course and think my own thoughts. And we're hoping that our members can learn to do this too, so we can model that. Marcus also quotes Epictetus, I think, when he says, our words and actions should not be like those of sleepers or of children copying their parents, doing and saying only what we have been told. So again, this is another example of when you could ask that, does this feel old question? Is someone saying something just because that's what they've heard their whole lives, or there's this interject of a parent or a partner that's kind of speaking through them? Is that really what their adult self with a capital S wants to say, or is this something from the past? Marcus says, others obey their own lead, follow their own impulses. Don't be distracted. Keep walking. Follow your own nature. Practice even what seems impossible. So practice is this inherently active thing. I don't think we can practice anything without actually doing something, even if it's cognitive or meditative. And group is, I think, above all else, an opportunity to practice new behaviors and do new things. And progressive emotional communication is definitely under that umbrella. That's when people are saying things they've never said before and expressing emotions in a new way and making new connections with other people. So some people might say, I could never say such and such to my husband. It's like, well, could you say it to this guy in group? It's like the stakes are much lower here. And there's a container and a professional, and this is where you can practice doing what otherwise feels impossible. Marcus says, whatever it may be, you can say or do it. Don't pretend that anything's stopping you. It's usually your own self that's stopping you. And group is hard work. I know Vanessa and I have certainly shared the experience of lots of sweating happening when we're in group. There's a real special kind of group sweat that can happen. It takes a lot of effort to do this discipline. And Marcus says that any work should be done in a principled way with diligence, energy, and patience, free of distractions. So this is where the importance of the container and the frame come in. So much of it is to reduce distractions. People come on time. Cell phones are silenced and put away. Eating and drinking is discouraged. And then social encounters outside a group are to be avoided. And a good group leader should just be trying to keep everyone focused on the job at hand by keeping that container really strong and reminding people that, we're here to practice superhuman truthfulness and to be better known by others and to know others better. And if we can sense like any kind of laziness or lifelessness pervading the group, that's when it's time to step in, intervene, maybe do something that feels scary or impossible for us. That'll definitely bring some life into the room. Because of my relationship to other parts, I will do nothing selfish, but aim instead to join them, to direct my every action toward what benefits us all and to avoid what doesn't. This one strikes me as more applicable to maybe leaders than members, because this fear of selfishness is often what keeps people quiet in groups. They don't want to talk about themselves because that feels selfish or self-absorbed. So they want to be practicing as members in the you world of the group as opposed to the it world, talking about themselves. And it actually isn't selfish. It actually is in service of the greater good or the group, because we're kind of making a collective soup here and everybody's an equally essential ingredient, and you add yourself to the soup by talking. But the leader is different because we really want to study the transference, and how that comes up between, our members and us. And it's good to keep a somewhat of a blank screen so that we can study what they might project onto us and work with that and help that develop. So the leader's priority is the group as a whole. And in this way, she does nothing selfish in the more traditional sense. Everything the leader does or says should benefit the entire group. This is not individual therapy with an audience. We're treating an entire group of people all at the same time, and we want to try and keep them engaged the entire time. Quite the feat. This idea that Ormont had, I quote this all the time: the more the group does, the more the group profits. So allowing them to do more is in their best interest. And then he also uses the word join here. Of course, he's not referring to the modern analytic technique of joining, which is very generally defined as a way for the analyst to communicate that she's in agreement with the patient. It might sound like if a group member doesn't want to talk, the leader could say, I wouldn't talk to this group if I were you either. Or if someone doesn't want to talk because she might start crying and won't be able to stop, you can say, I have no objection to you crying for the rest of this session, something like that. If they're disappointed in you, I really dropped the ball. I see how I let you down, that sort of thing. The present is all we have to live in or to lose. So this touches on the here and now focus of process groups. And action, the here and now-ness of action. It can't take place in the past or the future. It can only be described as having happened or as, about to happen. But actual action is happening right now. No exceptions. So this idea of the brevity of life, and in the Buddhist Sangha that I go to, this phrase gets repeated a lot: in a moment, life is gone. I think that's in Dogen's Rules for Meditation. So every now and then, without being too heavy-handed about it, I'll remind group members that this is very precious time that we're sharing right now. And what do you want to do with it? How do you want to make the most of it? If you were to die on your way home from group and your life flashed before your eyes, would you wish you'd said something that you're not saying? And that we're just here now together. This moment will never happen again. It's never happened before, never happen again. And then, of course, a big part of the work is just studying resistance, how people resist the here and now. And there are so many skillful ways of doing that, talking about the past, talking about the future, talking about things outside of group. One of my favorite ways of resisting the here and now is asking factual questions. And I think a big part of this resistance is just a fear that we have as humans of what Marcus calls the power within, which he says we should worship sincerely. And, this is the power that formed us in the womb, that urged us into existence. There's nothing stronger than that. So it's understandable that people would be a little scared of that and really, really contacting it in themselves and in others. So that's what we're studying, that resistance. And then one of my favorite Dharma teachers is Dave Smith. He has a podcast called Dave Smith Dharma. And he says the present moment doesn't exist. He calls it the present movement because there is no present moment that you can ever grab onto, right? It's always moving. And that is life. Change is life. And we are expressions of that constant change. That change is our true nature. And that's where the vitality comes in and that constant flux. No vital process can take place without something being changed. The things ordained for you, teach yourself to be at one with those and the people who share them with you. Treat them with love, with real love. You don't often think of love when you think of Stoicism, but it is a pretty important part of it. And this idea of things being ordained provides a nice segue into talking about will. And it also underscores how interconnected and overlapping all these concepts are. In order to act most effectively, we must perceive things clearly, and then we must know when action isn't called for, and we just need to accept things. But with also that word ordained feels very fitting for group, because I do think being a group leader is a really unique calling. And I like the idea of having ordained group psychotherapists instead of certified group psychotherapists. It feels a little more appropriate. And as challenging as the job is, leaders have to learn to be at one with those challenges because they are the job. The difficulty comprises the job, and it's, not a bad thing. And if it's made, if it's ordained for us, which Marcus would say anything that happens to us or anything that we're drawn to is ordained for us, then, we're made for that difficulty. So why resist it? It's made specifically for us. And therefore, Marcus would say it cannot harm us. We can welcome it in, become one with it. And then this idea of love versus real love made me think of my favorite definition of love, which is from Anthony DeMello. He said, love means to see something as it is, not as you imagine it to be, and to give it the response it deserves. And Marcus actually uses almost this exact language. I wonder if DeMello stole it from him. I hope not. I like to think it was more of the collective unconscious happening there, but he says in book 8 of Meditations, Meditation 29, he reminds himself that he has the innate ability, quote, to see things as they are and treat them as they deserve. And then later in the same book, he says, people find pleasure in different ways. I find it in keeping my mind clear, in not turning away from people or the things that happen to them, in accepting and welcoming everything I see, in treating each thing as it deserves. And that sounds like love to me, not turning your back on someone, accepting and welcoming everything, and responding as the situation calls for. So this accepting and welcoming everything is certainly, I'd say, more in the realm of the group leader's job than a group member. And this concept from improv comes to mind, the yes and ethos. In group, the yes would be the joining, and the and is the exploring. Might sound like you're angry? You should be angry. Tell me more. What's the anger feel like? Does it come with any impulses, etc.? So treating someone with love does not have to mean giving them what they want or gratifying all their wishes. In group, we investigate rather than gratify. And modern analysts can get a bad rap for being evasive, answering questions with questions, not gratifying people in that way. In the group that Chris and I run together, a member recently asked, essentially, what are we doing here? What's the point of this? How are we supposed to be using this group? Wonderful questions. Thrilling for me. I love that sort of inquiry and would love to answer it at length and maybe even get a little applause at the end. But it's better to turn it over to the group. I think that's the more loving thing to do, to use this language and to see what the group thinks. Again, the more the group does, the more the group profits. That's the loving thing, is to allow them to do as much as possible and empower them to speak and connect with each other and figure out what they think and feel, not what I think and feel. And then another important aspect, I think, of real love is a willingness to impact the other in a negative way, to hurt them, disappoint them, anger them, not on purpose, but we're human and it's going to happen. And as leaders, we're taught to welcome their aggression, their disappointment, whatever it might be, and to actually not apologize right away, if at all, so that they can have their emotion. Because a quick apology typically just shuts it right down, and they don't get to be with it, and we don't get to know them in it and see them in it, and they don't get to see that the relationship can survive that, and they don't get to see that we don't need them to like us all the time, which is such a huge gift. What a burden to feel like someone needs to be liked by us all the time. Our identity doesn't depend, on being liked by them because we genuinely love ourselves, i.e., are open to exploring and sitting with our own emotions and seeing them for what they really are and giving them the response they deserve. And so, with practice, hopefully, our group members can get better at that kind of loving, both of themselves and of others. Oh, yeah. And then this lovely question. Mr. Rogers, my friend Richard, who's also in Vanessa's consultation group, recently quoted Mr. Rogers in saying, "Who loved you into being?" which ideally is also what can happen in a really good process group. People just getting this kind of real love and therefore able to expand and become more of themselves. In a recent television interview, Elliot Zeisel, he's a very well-known group leader and co-founded the Center for Group Studies with Louis Ormont. He said that group members, quote, become anointed as assistants in your process of becoming somebody. And then this Rogers idea of who loved you into being, hopefully if a group's run well, the leader can hope that they will name them as the leader and their fellow members in answering that question, who loved you into being. So then this will section, real quick, is all about just accepting things that happen that we can't control and navigating them with this divine acquiescence. Marcus says, "Lift me up and hurl me wherever you will. My spirit will be gracious to me there, gracious and satisfied, as long as its existence and actions match its nature." And so the idea is that nothing that happens can prevent you from honoring your nature, honoring your, true self, and doing your best. Nothing can prevent you from putting forth your best effort, and that might look different in different situations. This concept, to be disgruntled at anything that happens, is a kind of secession from nature. Certainly anathema to group. We're going to get disgruntled. We're supposed to talk about it. We're supposed to name the aggression. So this is an example of how it doesn't quite apply all these Stoic ideas. But you can also play with it by asking questions like, what's your objection to, XYZ, to so-and-so feeling angry at you? That's kind of touching on this inclination toward disgruntlement, perhaps. And of course, we don't want to be disgruntled about being disgruntled. That just adds self-aggression to what's already a difficult experience. So that was as far as I got in the time allotted for the Zoom lecture. And I followed up with the participants in an email that provided the rest of what I was going to say about will and how it's explored in Meditations by Marcus Aurelius and how that might apply to process groups. So I'll just read that for you now. The next quote from Meditations reads, "Our inward power, when it obeys nature, reacts to events by accommodating itself to what it faces, to what is possible. It needs no specific material. It pursues its own aims as circumstances allow. It turns obstacles into fuel. What's thrown on top of the conflagration is absorbed, consumed by it, and makes it burn still brighter." So here's another passage that seems more applicable to group leaders than group members. The notion of needing no specific material reminds me of what Dogen Zenji says in the Tenzo Kyokun about never disparaging the cooking ingredients you have to work with. Sometimes as a group leader, it's tempting for me to think that if I only had different group members, then the group would do more of what I wanted it to do. But I have the group members I have, and I actually don't need them to do anything specific in order for me to keep doing my job, to keep putting forth my best effort. I can, quote, pursue my own aims as circumstances allow. If a group insists on talking about the past or about things outside of the room, I can study it. That's a big part of the job, after all, simply studying. And I can keep asking the question, how is what they're talking about a description of what's happening in the group right now? In this way, I can be, quote, ready to make good use of whatever happens, just as a monastery cook must be ready to make good use of any ingredients provided to him. Marcus also phrases it this way. Just as nature takes every obstacle, every impediment, and works around it, turns it to its purposes, incorporates it into itself, so too a rational being can turn each setback into raw material and use it to achieve its goal. If group members start talking about their mothers, for instance, and I can feel the vitality draining from the conversation, I might ask, how am I doing as a mother in here? Now we're back in the room, back in the present moment, where all life resides. If the setback looks more like an error on my part, let's say I use the wrong pronoun for someone who identifies as genderqueer. I can, quote, turn this to my purposes by inviting that person's anger, disappointment, frustration, disgust, whatever it might be, and by getting granular about what exactly happens for them and for the group when such moments of misattunement occur. From this perspective, we need not see anything that happens in a process group as bad. Marcus would even argue that anything that happens anywhere is good, or at least right. Here he is again. That every event is the right one. Look closely and you'll see, not just the right one overall, but right, as if someone had weighed it out with scales. The modern psychoanalytic concept of inducement or induction seems relevant to this meditation. In short, one of our many magical qualities as humans is to make people feel what we're feeling without even meaning to. I'm reminded now of how some group leaders will say, "You're having the right feeling." You might say, feelings are feelings. How can they be right or wrong? They just are. But with the notion of inducement in mind, a feeling can be called right if it seems like the other person involved is behaving in ways to elicit that feeling, usually a feeling they can't bear to acknowledge themselves. I can recall feeling profoundly annoyed with a group member several months ago when she announced that she was thinking about leaving the group. Granted, I generally find premature termination deeply vexing, but in this case my annoyance felt different, and the more she talked about her reasons for leaving, the more my annoyance amplified until it was full-on anger, which I of course kept to myself until I'd had some time to study it. Upon reflection, I realized that the anger I felt wasn't actually mine, or at least not completely. It was the client's unacknowledged and or expressed anger, felt all the more irritatingly by me precisely because it wasn't mine. Where I might normally chastise myself for being inordinately angry with a client for wanting to leave group, people are free, after all, to leave whenever they want to. For essentially having the wrong feeling, I could examine my feeling through the lens of inducement and see that it was actually right, in a way. It made sense that I would feel this client's disavowed anger. And then I could craft some interventions that might help us explore her anger and it being the actual reason she was leaving. Which we kind of did, but not to the extent I might have hoped. Marcus again. A healthy mind should be prepared for anything. The one that keeps saying, "Are my children all right?" or "Everyone must approve of me," is like eyes that can only stand pale colors or teeth that can handle only mush. "Make me ready" is a prayer I once heard and have never forgotten. This is very different from the many versions of "keep me safe" that can so often summarize our prayers. Bad things happen on this planet. Nobody, including children, ever gets to be all right all of the time. It's absurd to expect otherwise, and yet we do. That expectation is always, for most of us, humming along in the background. It's the water we swim in without knowing we're wet. Similarly, most of us expect, or perhaps hope for, everyone to approve of us. We at least want to feel understood. It's a good feeling, after all. But perhaps it's even better to feel that we can be misunderstood and not fall apart, not resort to old, conditioned tactics that ultimately result in pushing people away, thereby further reducing our chances of feeling understood. I'd like my eyes to be receptive to all the colors, so I can see all the vivid beauty this world has to offer, and I'd like my teeth to gnaw and chew like teeth are made to do. I want my eyes to be eyes and my teeth to be teeth, and I want myself to be self, with a capital S, in touch with all its creative powers regardless of the circumstance, always there and thus always prepared because it's there. I don't need others to approve of me because I approve of myself. Besides, anything that happens, any person or event, came from the same source that I came from and is made of all the same stuff, the same logos. I am therefore inherently equipped to deal with it effectively, because on the most fundamental level, it's not different from me. So I am always already prepared if I can stop believing the parts of my psyche that say I'm not. Marcus says, "You can hold your breath until you turn blue, but they'll still go on doing it." When I find myself wishing a group member would act or speak differently, or more or less, it's helpful to recall this meditation and to proceed with this attitude of divine acquiescence. I operate on the assumption that they're never going to change, and it certainly isn't my job to change them. As Marcus says, my job is, quote, "to do them good and put up with them." Of course, through our not trying to change them, they are more likely to change. Cue Carl Rogers. Along a similar vein, Marcus says, "It's silly to try to escape other people's faults. They are inescapable. Just try to escape your own." Regarding that last bit, I'd argue that it's also silly to try to escape your own faults, and will reiterate the importance of simply becoming more aware of them and studying them. In group, we have the added benefit of hearing how they impact others. And here's the last Marcus quote I'll provide. "Remembering that the whole class has to exist will make you more tolerant of its members." This meditation reinforces the one that came before it. Not only should we stop expecting others to change, we should recognize and appreciate that they are needed just as they are. Marcus says, when you run up against someone else's shamelessness, ask yourself this: is a world without shamelessness possible? No. Then don't ask the impossible. There have to be shameless people in the world. The same for someone vicious or untrustworthy, or with any other defect. This reminds me of Byron Katie's The Work, and the question that she calls the turnaround. When we say to ourselves, that person should change, we can turn the thought around and say, that person shouldn't change. This perspective shift can remind us that it really does take all kinds to make the world go round. The Logos, after all, consists of everything, and everything has its place and its reason for being there. Marcus is also presenting the idea of there being types of people that have to exist. If I have a difficult group member, I can tell myself that there are countless other people in the world who are difficult in very similar ways, that it isn't unique to this one person. If they left the group, another person like them would eventually take their place. So I may as well get better at putting up with the one I've already got. And that's going to do it for this episode of Time and Other Thieves. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Sarah B. If you ever want to contact me via email, feel free to do that at sarahbsimpson@protonmail.com. And if you'd like to hear the other episode I did on the book Meditations, I think it was just the 5th episode. It was way, way back in the beginning when the podcast was a radio show. It is there for you on various streaming platforms. It's one of my favorite episodes, if I do say so myself. Thanks again, and take care.